Well, hello and welcome to the fourth edition of our women's health progression, where we start to talk about women's health from when they start menstruating to when they stop menstruating and beyond. Um, and today we're going to be talking about perimenopause again. I went into a quick definition in the last episode. We talked a little bit about perimenopause last time. Peri means around, and meno means menses, and pause meaning pause menses or stop menses. So perimenopause is around the time you're going to probably start having menstrual type issues before menopause. So right about before menopause. So um, we're going to specifically talk about hysterectomy and ablations today. And what we're going to do is we're going to get into some definitions first. So let's just start with some definitions of hysterectomies. There's a total hysterectomy. Let's just start with partial. A partial hysterectomy is basically where the uterus is removed, but not the cervix. A total hysterectomy is the uterus and the cervix is removed. And then and sometimes a total hysterectomy gets mixed up with they take your ovaries. That's not necessarily true. But a total hysterectomy with an oophorectomy, oopho meaning eggs, that's where they take your ovaries. So when they do take your ovaries, you will go into menopause immediately because you will stop producing hormones immediately. So, Janet, talk about some of the issues we have when we're dealing with hormones when somebody has had a hysterectomy.
Oh man. Well, first of all, the hormonal changes are significant very quickly. Dryness, irritation, UTIs, mental symptoms such as anxiety, stress. You might have heart palpitations. You might have trouble sleeping. Oh man, there's a
Depression.
lot. Depression.
So does it matter if they've had their ovaries removed or not? Is there a difference?
I think there's some difference, but let's be real. When you have part of the tissue removed, it changes things significantly. And how that changes for each woman is different. But a total with an oophorectomy seems to be almost like someone hits the wall. I mean, those women, it's hard immediately. And sometimes they have a surgeon or a primary that will give them some form of hormones for a short period of time to help them. Because, I mean, that's just like turning the gas off in the car. It's just nothing. And what really gets lost in this picture, and Shawn and I have talked about this in other episodes, is hormones are really important because they don't just affect your reproductive system. So even though we are talking about removing body parts like our uterus or our ovaries or the cervix, our hormones overall affect every part of our body because we have cell receptors that need these hormones everywhere: our brain, our vessels, our bones. So it depends on the woman and how severe um, the removal is and what she's experiencing prior to. Um, One of the things I think that we forget is that many times women that end up in this situation probably have had some real irregularities in their cycles for many years. And it probably started maybe even in their teenage years. They never quite got to the level of hormones that they needed to have a regular cycle. But even if they did and things start going off, we start having women that have heavy periods or no periods at all. But usually it's the women that have endometriosis or heavy periods that, oh, you have to have, to save you, to keep you away from cancer or all these other issues, to just keep your lifestyle comfortable. Let's either do an ablation, or which we didn't really talk about that, but that's really just burning tissue. And then, if we give you a hysterectomy, that's going to solve all your problems,
Right.
especially if you're PCOS or have endometriosis, and that's just really not true.
No, and let's talk about uterine ablation. Uterine ablation is where they basically take the uterus and the endometrium in the uterus that you might have irregular bleeding, heavy period, something like that, usually during perimenopause,
Right.
and they just literally burn that tissue off. And what doctors have been taught for years and generations is that, your uterus and your cervix and your ovaries are for reproduction only.
That's it.
And once you're done having kids, you don't need them.
Mm-mm.
And that is just completely a lie. We already talked about how important hormones are to other places in the body, other tissues in the body. If you have a doctor that says that, get a new doctor. Run as fast as you can. And here's what I want to make an analogy to. So I think it's pretty obvious that, the testes produce sperm. Yet, do we ever cut off men's balls? I
Right.
know that sounds, like, oh, that's ridiculous. Exactly. We would never, ever accept that, because what happens when you cut off a man's balls? He doesn't have libido anymore. He can't build muscle mass anymore. He can't build his bones anymore. He doesn't have competitive drive anymore. He gets depressed. Guess what? The ovaries produce testosterone, just like the testes do in a man. So you can have those same symptoms as a woman. So Janet likes to tell patients that when you have a hysterectomy, when a woman has a hysterectomy, it takes 10 years off her life.
Minimum.
Yeah, minimum. Now, and a lot of morbidity with all the symptoms that come along with it, whether it be osteoporosis or cardiovascular problems. And doctors sell it like it's a thing for convenience. And I hear patients all the time, oh, I can't wait to not have periods, so I'm just going to do a hysterectomy. Now, and think about this. And now then they thought, okay, well, maybe we should leave their ovaries, because their ovaries do have some kind of function producing hormones. But think about this, how our bodies are designed. Do you not think that our bodies are designed, and do you not think your ovaries know when your uterus is removed?
Of course they do.
Of course it does. So then your ovaries are going to say, wait a minute, I've lost part of my, I've lost something that I'm supposed to be producing hormones for. So I'm not going to produce them like I did before. Now, I can honestly tell you, I don't know if there's any study out there that says this, but just think rationally about it. Your body knows what it needs, and your body produces estrogen and progesterone to thicken and thin the endometrium. So when it's not there anymore, whether it be an ablation or whether it be a hysterectomy, you bet you it's going to affect your hormones. And I don't care what any study out there says. Realize this too, that doctors that do ablations, doctors that do hysterectomies, they are surgeons.
Right.
OBGYNs, and I have a lot of friends that are OBGYN doctors, but they are surgeons. That's how they make money. I am just saying that. So it's important to do your own research about this before you commit to it, because you can't go backwards.
Right.
And it's usually a hormone issue, usually progesterone, that's causing the irregular bleeding, the heavy cycles. You can go on progesterone, and if it doesn't work, then no harm, no foul. Later on, you could always go the hysterectomy route. I would never recommend that.
Yep.
But you need to change your hormones first.
Right. I think, to be very clear, unless somebody has cancer and you need to remove that tissue, I think you need to give hormones a fair chance, especially to be balanced. Because a lot of times what is setting you up is, oh, we don't know, and the fear factor. And then they put you on birth control pills for so long, and that's a mess. And if you have endometriosis, Shawn and I have seen many clients over the years that it doesn't solve the problem, maybe for a very
Right.
short term, but suppressing hormones does not solve the problem if you have an imbalance of other hormones. It's not just estrogen.
Or cutting off a body
Right.
part doesn't solve the
No.
problem.
So we get in this trap, we go in, and we trust who's in front of us, but we don't get a second opinion, and perhaps, step back, think about it before you go forward. Even if you think you're committed to something, you can reschedule. Just think rationally, calmly, take a deep breath and decide, maybe I can consider other options before I go down this path. And the reason we say that is because even though I have some women that have came through it well, it is a major event in your life to have these type of procedures done to you.
And we've seen, unfortunately, we've seen women that have a total hysterectomy with an oophorectomy when they're in their 20s,
Right.
and the ramification
It's
later
lifelong.
on is horrible. Bone density problems, cardiovascular problems, depression, all kinds of things that,
All
your body's supposed to produce hormones to make your
right.
body strong um, and productive.
So, what we're really saying is we need to step back and say hormones do not just affect reproduction, they affect all functions in our life to all health issues. So, whether it's lean muscle mass, whether it's cardiovascular health, or even brain health. I mean, it is out there, proven lack of estrogen, estradiol in the brain causes problems with dementia and Alzheimer's. Then you start looking at like testosterone and progesterone. Known fact, without enough testosterone, women will have osteoporosis as well as progesterone. So, you know, it's not like it's like this weird stuff out there in science fiction.
No.
There's stuff out there to prove that this is so true. But here's the thing: mainstream health, standard care always has a line driven because we have something called insurance.
Yeah. So, your doctor will often tell you, well, you're at the place where a hysterectomy would be covered under your insurance,
Right.
or what have you. Well, let me just tell you this. Be very, very cautious when you're told that your insurance covers something, because your insurance does not care about your health. The
Mhm.
drug company that is in collusion with that insurance to create a cartel to rip off consumers and to push drugs or surgeries, if it's device companies and things like that make money on surgeries, they don't care about your health. Insurance companies don't care about your health. In fact, they might want you to have a hysterectomy early so you die early, so it saves them money. So do your own research. Realize that your body was made wonderfully if you give it the right inputs. Janet, let's talk about how the woman has a hysterectomy but didn't have her ovaries removed, so no oophorectomy. Um, can you still tell if a woman is producing hormones?
Certainly. Well, you can do a lab and you can also do symptomatic. I mean, how a woman's feeling. And here's kind of fallacy because after we are slowing down with our hormone production with our ovaries, our adrenal gland comes back into primary to perform that function. So some women can transfer very well and some don't, but that's, their stress, their body, how healthy they are. But here's the thing: remember, symptoms are super important. I mean, we fall into this trap of labs because labs are paid by insurance companies sometimes, maybe not always, but that's kind of like that's how I'm going to go down the path of medicine. And I'm not saying they're not important, they are. But here's the thing: symptoms as a human are really important. And so, if you are having disruption of your sleep cycle, excessive sweating, hot flashes, irritability, not being able to think well, having foggy brain fog, not, something different than you normally had in your life, low libido, dryness, UTIs, all those things are important to me because when a woman is presenting things, you got to listen to what she's experiencing. And if she is telling you certain things, there is probably a lack of hormones somewhere along that line.
And talk about, Janet, how even without labs, isn't it true that some women can still tell if they're ovulating if they haven't had a
100%.
hysterectomy? So tell me about that.
So here's the thing. When people ovulate, usually it's one side, and many women that have maybe been very conscious of what their body is doing will know what side of their body is releasing the egg just by inflammation, just the actual sensation of it. They're in tune, and maybe not every woman experiences it, but many women do. And you can tell what side is going to come from. And obviously, it probably rotates. Our body's so smart and so dynamic, but there is that function of our body. Like it tells you what's happening and what you are experiencing.
And so even though you don't have a menses, you can tell that you're still ovulating. So
many women do.
When we talk to women and they're in the perimenopause age, mid 40s,
Right.
late 40s, and they've had a partial hysterectomy, we can ask them, can you tell if you're ovulating? Some women can. So then you know, without even doing labs, that their ovaries are probably still working somewhat.
Right.
But if they have some of the symptoms Janet was talking about, then obviously their ovaries aren't working perfectly. Or you can even tell them sometimes, like, do you ovulate every month? No, I don't anymore. Right. And that's a sign that their ovaries aren't working like they used to.
And it might be just as slight as this. Usually when we ovulate, we have more mucus discharge.
Right.
And we have more hydration into the tissue, which makes sense, right? And that is one topic we haven't hit on, but there are practitioners that help women with fertility that look at where you are with the amount of mucus that you are releasing, which is super important if you're thinking about fertility. And that still happens throughout your cycle as we age. But if people aren't ovulating, they may not notice that anymore. And if they're removed, obviously that's not going to be something they experience anymore.
And ovulating basically means ova means egg. It means you're releasing an egg, and that's when you are the most fertile. So when your vaginal tissue has that extra mucus that it's producing, it's a sign that you are ovulating, and that is the largest chance that you could get pregnant.
Right. Which could be good or bad, depending on what your lifestyle is looking for. Some women, and this is something Shawn and I have experienced, you put them on progesterone and they become more fertile, whether they wanted to or not, but that is a possibility. So that is something that we do talk to women about, that, if you go on progesterone, which I think is super important, but they need to be aware of that.
So tell us about, and I think we hit on this in the previous episode, but tell us about the disadvantage of checking labs during perimenopause.
So one of the problems is that if you haven't had a procedure and you're just going through perimenopause naturally, you're going to have spikes of hormones being released and made, because it's kind of this on and off, on and off. Shawn and I have sat at conferences, and one of the things that one of the doctors would talk about is this is no man's land. And really, it kind of is, because one day your body's saying, hey, I can do this. And the next it's saying, not really. So it depends on when you check those labs. And certainly they can be a tool, but they need to be paired with what's happening. So a lot of times when we look at labs with women that are having perimenopause, they usually have decent estrogen levels. But usually you can see that their progesterone's not great. And that's pretty common. You can also look at their testosterone levels, and free testosterone is super important, because I want to see what's being released into the bloodstream, not just bound to protein. So why that's important is because those are kind of hormones that are going to give you direction, but you can't always count on them, because they're a time frame. Like, it's a picture in time. It's going to change from one day to the next. It doesn't mean that is the conclusive piece of evidence that, oh, yeah, this is what we have to do because this level, and this is the level I was at 3 months ago or a year or whatever. You need to realize that you pair it with the individual. And that's super important, because right now in our standard of care, we treat a number, not the individual. So it may not reflect, you might get a level for something that may not reflect what the person is telling you. And that's okay. You treat the patient and their symptoms, not the piece of paper that has a lab value on.
Labs are a tool to go along with symptoms and history, period. And everybody's optimal level is different.
Totally.
And one of the problems with progesterone, if you look at checking levels of progesterone,
it can be all over the place.
Even on the normal ranges of progesterone, it'll show you what a normal is for a postmenopausal woman, a pregnant woman, a woman in her luteal phase, or a woman in her follicular phase. Well,
What
wait a
does that
minute.
mean? For
Right,
who?
right. It's all over the board. So
Is it a
really,
healthy person?
right. And that's one of the problems with labs is,
Right.
what's normal is not always optimal. Let's realize that labs are based on an average of individuals that are going to the doctor, typically sick
Right.
people, right? So we deal with this with testosterone and thyroid all the time. I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to be normal. I don't want to be a normal sick person. I want to be optimal. I
You
want
want to
to,
be a healthy
right,
individual. And that kind of
right.
comes down, I mean, RDA is another example of how our government has like put in there like this is what you should be shooting for, but usually recommended daily allowances of supplements really means that's the lowest level that's going to keep you healthy.
No,
And that
from
to
not being
me,
sick, not healthy, but from not being
yeah, but
sick.
that's what
Right.
they're shooting for, right? Which to me is like, no, it should be what optimal level of what is going to keep me healthy and thriving. And let's remember, thriving does not mean existing, right? We don't want to just exist.
No. So, Janet, as we wrap this episode up on perimenopause, how do you want to finish?
So, I think the most important part for women to realize is that this transition happens to everybody. It all looks different. Just maintain some grace for yourself as a human being, that there's going to be some ups and downs, but you will survive. You also need to look for people that are going to help you honestly. So if you run into somebody that's telling you, oh, you know what, I really think if you don't change, I'm going to put you on an antidepressant, an antipsychotic, I'm going to give you something like a seizure med, or we have to do these drastic measures, just realize that there's other information out there. Take your time, step back, and realize there's millions of women that have went through the same things you have. There's answers and solutions. Just search for them and don't just jump on like, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. Relax.
And I will say this: birth control pills
Mm,
and surgery are not the answer.
no. Mm-mm. But that's our opinion. And we
Do your own
realize,
research.
right? We realize what our bias is because we focus on hormones and we do own a compounding pharmacy. But I will say this: I think people that are given the chance to respond and think and research are going to feel better about their own decisions and how to proceed in life without somebody dictating to them what to do.
Well, that about covers it for the second episode. Actually, I think fourth overall episode and second episode where we talked about perimenopause. So tune into episode 5, where I think we're going to start going into premenopause and postmenopause. So thank you for tuning in to our Women's Health edition. Thank you.